G'day guys, Mac with the Outer Circle, and in today's episode we're going to be looking at the World Eaters Legion range. So to kick it off, we have the original World Eaters Legion Mark II upgrade set. This is a series of kind of cool heads. They sort of have this Greek Corinthian helm style thing with that Mandalorian T-visor going on. And it does harken back to, something that you could almost imagine being in like the Gladiator pits or something like that. The bear head, pretty far from my favourite, and most of these sets have pretty poor heads by today's standards of sculpt, so not the biggest fan of those. And it falls into the pitfall that many of these sets fell into, which is that they only give you 9 helmets, and you kind of need 10 for a squad, if you're going to equip an entire unit. And if you have a 20-man unit, well, do you need 2 crested sergeant's helms? No. So, it would have been nice to have 11 or 12 heads in these sets, not 10, ironically. And a lot of people also don't want the bear head. I don't really use them a lot, except on maybe the occasional character, because it's a bit distracting just seeing like one random tactical marine with a bear head, for example. Not the biggest fan of it. Then we have the Legion Mark III upgrade veteran heads, and these are a cut-paste job. They basically sculpted one and decided to release it as its own set. And I like them, but I've never seen a time where I thought that I needed an entire unit full of this particular head. Obviously, it's heading in the direction of, say, the Khorne Berserkers of 40k. It's got the bunny ears going on. I thought that one of this set, and just using these as, say, sergeant's helmets to go with these helmets, is probably the better use for them. Put them on the occasional characters and such. And I do like the sculpt. It is, of course, one sculpt, and I pick on a lot of the Mark VI ones for that. I'm going to pick on these for it, because it's not really a set of veterans' heads. This is just the same head over and over again, and then it's a bit lazy. Now, the bunny ears come out of literally the ears of the helmet, which is very different to the next set, which is where the bunny ears actually come out the sort of side of the head above the ears of the helmet. And I won't lie, I'm not actually the biggest fan of this set. I prefer the older style. This is much truer to the World Eaters that we've had in the past versus this set. There's something about the less aggressive look of these, that they don't have that wide angular appearance that the older ones did. Now, it does make it a bad set, but I'm not particularly drawn to them. I think I would have much rathered a very much more Sarum patterned helmet, something very similar to what Khan has in 30k. These just, I don't know, for whatever reason, they just don't quite work for me. I think it's partly because the ears, they all have this sort of upwards angle. They come up and they're above the ear, versus the other heads here where it's a much more shallow angle, so it's very sharp-edged, almost like the head of an axe forming the ear. Whereas on these, it doesn't feel like that. It feels much softer, much more curvy. Could just all be in my head. And of course, this is pretty much the same helmet copy-pasted as well, with little skull on the top of this helmet. Yeah, I guess they're totally different now. Yeah, the sergeant's helmet with like the pseudo butcher's nails sculpted into the top of it does nothing for me, but I do like the snarling sort of snout here. And the old World Eaters upgrades that were at Forge World, those heads look really good too when they're interspersed here. And I'll give it to them. This bare-headed sergeant sort of model, much better choice and would look good on a character in the World Eaters. But I wouldn't go out of my way for this set, and I would occasionally use these ones. But really, I think these helmets are where it's at for the Legion. These are my favourites by far out of the 3 choices available. Then we get to the Contempor, and this is just a shame. Losing the rest of this model is a real letdown, because this was a fantastic Dreadnought. It was the best, in my personal opinion, with the Death Guard one following very closely behind, so spoilers for my opinion there. This Dreadnought was amazing, and it was the standard which no other Dreadnought really lived up to. There were a few contenders, the Alpha Legion one, the the Thousand Suns Dreadnought, the Death Guard Dreadnought, they were up there. But the World Eater's Contemptor was just the perfect blend, I felt, of heresy details without having too much ostentatious trim, without having too many symbols, without going over the top. It had just the right amount. It had space for you to add your own decals, but it also had sculpted details that were interesting. And the World Eaters Legion icon works really well for being a sculpted on icon, which not all legions do. And the use of things like the lightning bolts very much is that sort of Great Crusade era motif. And it really helped to sell this legion as being around for a while. These aren't Khorne Berserkers, this is the World Eaters. And I love it. It's still my favourite Dreadnought, but damn, it suffers from not having the full resin kit anymore. Then we get to the Legion Elite units, and I like the Rampagers a lot. But the Rampagers are a bunch of small, angry men. They are tiny in comparison to the rest of the current range. And they are some of the last Mark II models actually available. Now, I like that they've got the sort of Mark II chest plate, but on the belt buckle, they have a sort of ball or half ball bearing sort of thing happening there, which replaces the traditional Aquila Eagle that you see on, the guy at the back does have one, but it feels more like a Berserker. Those little round shields you see on the shoulders of a knight that protect the armpit. Kind of feels like that, which is interesting. And the collar of the Mark II being spiked, basically. It's had little perforations made in it where they've stuck in spikes, so it's almost like the World Eater's own armor is a weapon. They're that violent a legion. Same with the spikes running down the outside of the upper thighs and around the shoulder guards. All of that just adds to the menace. I don't really care for the little bits of chain dangling off the hip. That sculpted on chain, it does make posing them a little bit more frustrating. Not hard, but more frustrating, because it limits the amount of poses you can put the torso into. Now, the bad part of the kit is the heads. They are not the best sculpted heads in the world. They look very, very munted and weird. Mr. Potato Head. They were fine for the time, but compared to the sculpting of fleshy heads today, they are very underwhelming. And they're gigantic. They're gigantic helmet-sized heads comparative to the bodies, which looks a bit weird. I like the bare arms on the miniatures. Again, going for sort of those 40k World Eaters looks, which is great. But then we fall down in one key category, and that is the cut-array weapons. There is one cut-array weapon that's fantastic, two that are okay, and one that's underwhelming. And of course, the best one's the one up front. There's the Phalanx Blades. Any rumours that you might have heard that there are other weapons, even spread by me, are a lie. There are no other cut-array weapons, only Phalanx Blades. And the problem is, you get basically one set of most of these weapons, or two sets of these weapons. And because these are thin, brittle resin, it's very easy to break many of these weapons. So I made 3D STL that I print with tenacious resin to try and make up for that. So like Kat, for example, co-host on the channel, I think I gave him like 100 3D printed ones that I did. I drew up a design, modified them, and put them into a tenacious resin, which means they're flexible to avoid that snapping issue. But the squad as a whole, you aren't able to arm them all identically, and that's annoying because most people like to run units of identical weapons because it's easy to roll, and usually if you're taking weapons because the one you like the most, or you like its performance characteristics, or whatever it might be. So being limited in what you can take is really annoying, and I'm pretty sure it's two sets of each weapon that you get in the kit. I wish it was otherwise, because it's really annoying. And the weapons look so cool. I'm not quite sure how you can take twin Phalanx Blades off a model and also have a Thunderhammer at the same time if you put them on a character, but you can. Rules is written, funny things. Of course, the excruciated chain axes, they're the coolest looking weapon ever because it's just a giant chain axe. Let's face it, that's cool as hell. Maybe the Death Guard Man Reapers come close. It's a real shame that they don't sell the weapons themselves independently. Like, it feels like they should. They should sell chain axe sets independently as a part of the World Eaters range. But as you can see, going all the way back to the start here, they do not. If you want to find chain axes, you've got to go about that another way. So, yeah, but a lovely squad, and it just really scale crept heavily because just, you know, everything Games Workshop does is making everything bigger and nicer looking than the last thing. And it means that these guys that were, you know, they were decent sized Marines when they first came out. Now they're the size of Imperial Guardsmen. And, I mean, it really shows. And it's a shame because I do love them in so many ways. Then we get to the Red Butchers, and I'm not the biggest fan of this sculpt. There are many reasons why it doesn't work for me, but sort of defining them is really hard. This is supposed to be suits of Cataphracti Terminator armor, which have like hooks and chains to... Basically, these guys are so insane that between battles, they just have to get chained up inside their suits of armor. The suit of armor forms basically a prison. Almost like a coffin or a sarcophagus around the member. And yeah, they don't all look very cataphracti for a start. And I don't know that I like this interpretation of the armor as like an alternate sculpt. Not the biggest fan in the world of it. And just a lot of random like brass trim and stuff going off in random directions. It seems a bit too chaotic for, you know, these guys are not the ones who are modifying their armor and changing their armor to have some sort of new style. These are rampaging madmen who are trapped in this armor. So I feel like it should be more utilitarian, more like stock cataphracti armor with the chains and the hooks to tie them down, and maybe some brutal spikes added to them. But having like custom helmets and stuff like that, it just doesn't seem quite right to me. But I do love the axes. I think the axes look really, really cool. They are like the Legion, part of the Legion icon almost. You know, that toothed maw. That's kind of what it looks like to me. And the style of chain fist, this sort of curved chain fist on the sergeant, I really like that. But are the pitfalls? Well, again, they're all in helmets, which, funny enough, these guys are so insane. I feel like a helmet is getting in the way of the maniac. I wish they all had bare heads. And there was actually a previous sculpt for these guys before they were released where they did all have bare heads, which would have been better in my opinion. And they're another unit that falls foul of the you don't get the war gear options that you need in the game. In this case, they can all take lightning cores, which actually works out to be the better option in most scenarios over the twinned power axes. But you don't get any lightning cores in the set. So I hope you like converting, and you will be cutting resin arms because these things are not the most posable in the world. So yeah, if you want to run them with lightning cores, get out the saw because you're going to have to start cutting. And it's 5 pairs of lightning cores. Would it really have been that hard to sculpt or add them to the kit? I guess it would have, but these are the quality of life features I wish that many Legions had, and they just don't. Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of them for that reason. Anyway, Khorne Berserkers in 40k. Why am I bringing these guys up in a 30k video? Well, one of my big complaints here was things like bare heads. There are some really good snarling helmed bare heads in this set, which I think would look really good on sergeants, especially on characters, because the larger sculpt size of the 40k miniatures, I think it works really well. And you could even use the bodies. I know they've got like a lot of gold trim and such, but there are also sections that don't have as much gold trim. They would probably work well with the Rampage's torsos or parts of the Rampager weapons to get some better sized Rampages. They are not super chaotic. Yeah, there's a tiny bit of spiky gold trim, but if we look back at the Legion Rampages, well, we have spiky gold trim. And it's creeping in spiky gold trim on these miniatures. So it's not that much of a leap to say that, you know, it's they're maybe just a little bit more down the path of Khorne. Some of the weapons, like the twin-headed chain axe here, they would look also really good as conversion options on the new plastic Praetors, or say the Legion Champion models that have come out recently. So consider those as viable options to include there. And the Anvilus backpacks. Pretty much all of these just have skulls on them. The Anvilus backpack is an accepted pattern of backpack that is in service with the Legiones Astartes during the Great Crusade. So what would be wrong with including a few of these backpacks, especially on characters? Just it looks a little bit more aggressive. Having that wide backpack makes the character a little bit wider, a little bit larger, a little bit more imposing. I'm not saying use full 40k miniatures in the army. I think that's not really the spirit of 30k necessarily, but utilizing parts of these selectively, using parts of their bodies or their legs to add size, is probably a really good approach, especially like creating a command squad or even characters in the army. There's a lot of bits in here that can be utilized, especially, as I said, the bare heads. Then we get to the characters. Khan the Bloody. This was an Edgar Skoromowski sculpt, and yeah, he nailed it. This is a lovely model. I really like that the plasma pistol here is very much like his 40k incarnation. It has the skull built into it. It seems like something that would have been a derpy detail, like very 1990s style of thing. Like, oh, it's cool to have a gun which is made of skulls. Like, you know, that old school heavy metal vibe of Games Workshop. It's just a bit silly. And yet, damn, my man made it work. It looks great. The Mark IV becoming almost Mark V armor on him, with the knees having the World Eaters icons baked into those square Mark IV knee pads, with the studs of the Mark V power armor creeping in. Like, this is armor that's been damaged because it's always in the thick of the action. It's had to be reinforced, and that's cool. And we have the sort of gladiator style armor, like a Lorica Segmentata type forearm going on here, just hinting again at that World Eater Pitfighter heritage. The nails on the helmet works in Khan's case here. The Sarum type helmet with the short crest, the very aggressive face. And of course the sort of sculpted rib cage and chest breastplate. It hints at like an artifice, once upon a time, the World Eaters, prior to the nails, probably cared and probably wove a lot of artifice and cared about what their equipment looked like and took pride in it. Aesthetics is not something that just, Emperor's Children or Ultramarines or Blood Angels cared about. The World Eaters might very much have cared too, maybe taking it as a sign of prestige or, martial prowess and showing off their victories in battle. And we see that with like the shoulder pad here, the embellishment in it. Like, clearly this is artificed armor. He cared once about his armor. The little jaws in the back of the Mark IV backpack here, same thing again. And it tells the story of like, this guy was once a praetor, who had the best equipment, and is just slowly devolving into a madman. At least that's the story I think it tells here. And hey, opinions might differ on that. And he also has one of the nicer bare heads as well, comparatively, with the butcher's nails. Like, physically, you can see these sort of lines and striations on the skin, like it's stretching the flesh on the skull. It's a bit grisly, and I really like it. I think, yeah, that looks good. So Khan is a big win. But this weapon, his alternate weapon, if you don't take Gorechild, it just looks like an orc chopper. I would have liked to have seen something else. Okay, maybe not a chain axe because he has one, but maybe like a cutlery weapon would have been nice. Meteor hammer or phalanx blades, something like that. If you didn't see a power armor marine, if you just saw this hand and that weapon on its own, you would think this was an orc. It's the least impressive part of the model. And it feels like it's just there to differentiate it from his basic Gorechild weapon. Oh, it can't look the same. Don't want people to get confused. Anyway, that's it. That's all the characters we have, unfortunately. There was never any alternate sculpts. There was never Any other characters released for the World Eaters? There are no Praetors released for the World Eaters. This really kind of hurts. I hear that there is a World Eaters Praetor in the pipeline as the next Legion Praetor release, since we got the Space Wolf one recently. If that happens, I will talk about it in an upcoming video, but for now, this is what we've got, which is why I suggest, Corn Berserker parts from 40k, combined with 30k plastics to try and make something. And we'll finish up, of course, with the Primark Angron, the first Primark created for the Horus Heresy game. This guy grossed all the cover art, the posters, everything when the Horus Heresy first came out. And I still love this mold to this day. In fact, this is one of the only Primarks where I want to paint another one. Most Primarks, I get through it, I'm like, that was good, that was fun. Let's never do that again. Angron is one of the only Primarks where I'm like, hey, I kind of want to get another one, because I first painted him back in 2012. Cat got one first. I got one a few weeks later. Cat's, I think, is still sealed, new in box. He never actually opened it. And he probably never will, because he doesn't really like Primarks. But he bought him, and I think he's the only Primark he did actually buy. So his is still brand new in its Forge World box. My one was ripped out of its Forge World box years ago. And you can see how much things have changed. The style of the painting here, it is very military scale modeler, realistic. There's no edge highlighting really on the Marines around it. Just you can tell the vintage of the model. His display base is actually one of the worst display bases to physically mount. Okay, I like the simplicity of it. I wish all of the bases were this simplistic. Just, hey, he's rampaging through a bunch of people, just murdering his way on the battlefield. Cool, I'm down with that. Problem is, though, the base is a single solid piece of resin all the way around. My advice to you is, if you buy one, cut it in half, because getting his 40mm base into it, it's really tight and can be a bit of a challenge at times, or it just doesn't want to go in, or it doesn't want to come out, because resin shrinks as it cures, and this creates all sorts of issues, whereas all of the Primarks since Angron are made with multi-part surrounds that go around the 40mm base that the Primark is standing on, for that exact reason. Now, the actual model itself, I just love it. When they released him, I couldn't think at the time, and even looking back now, like nostalgia side, I couldn't think of a model that more perfectly is what I imagined the Primark would look like. None of the others look as good to me as what I imagined they would from the artwork that we had of them. Angron was perfect for me. Now, it doesn't make him my favourite Primark sculpt. It does suffer from a few flaws, like that base, and also the head is not a removable component, which means you have to paint that super pale flesh in situ in that golden armour, and paint, the butcher's nails and the red tattooing around the eyes. You've got to do it all in situ, which it can be kind of hard to get the brush into all the locations and paint the bright red behind his head. And it's just those little things where it's like, I really would, I really would have liked to have had the head as a separate component. And again, that's something they changed on Fulgrim, the very next model, so from Fulgrim onwards. And this is something we would see repeated over and over again. But as it stood, wow, just knocked it out of the park. Simon Egan, who sculpted this on the very first Primark, it was perfect. And I don't want to resculpt this. I think this is perfect as it is. He looks small, he looks short in stature compared to the other Primarks. Looks very squat front on. That's because his body is stretched right out. His foot is back here. He is running, sprinting at the enemy. And so he's low down, squatting almost, because he is sprinting and shoulder charging straight into someone. And when you see this model in the flesh, it is gorgeous. And if you stand him on that back foot, his height is very comparable to the other Primarks, who normally seem about a head taller than him. And the tasteful display base, just everything about it. I just gush over this model, and I do want to buy and paint another one. Although next time I probably won't buy the legit one, because now he is $168. I think I got the original one for like $75. So it's like doubled in price in like 12 years. It hurts. It hurts. But yeah, wow, what a beautiful model. And I just wish they were sculpted like this today. And more thought was put into this model than a lot of the new Primarks, where they're more flashy, they're more blingy, they have more stuff going on, but you lose the character in that. Like, I'm not the biggest fan of the new Horus, for example. I just think it's an overblown mess. But we'll get to that anyway. Anyway, that's it for me. I'm Mac with the Outer Circle. Thank you for watching this episode on the World Eaters, and the next one up will be the Ultramarines. So I'll see you on that video.